the session on planning your vacation Bible school. Now, on this webpage, you're going to find an audio session, and that audio session is about planning children's ministry events. And that session is going to walk you through all the details that you need to think about when you plan any kind of event, whether vacation Bible school or a fall festival or a children's retreat. You always want to begin with your purpose. Now, with vacation Bible school, your purpose has to be about the kids. Your purpose is to share Jesus with the kids, to introduce kids to Christ, to help kids fall in love with Jesus, and to make the decision to follow Him with all their heart. So you've got to begin with the right purpose, because the right purpose is not, oh, we want a bunch of numbers or a bunch of fun. You've got to begin with the core, which is always going to be a spiritual truth. And then you build your event to fulfill that purpose. And then at the end, when you come to evaluate your vacation Bible school, you evaluate it not on the basis of superficial things, but on the basis of, did we fulfill our purpose, and how do we measure that purpose? And so you may measure it from the point of, measurables are sometimes hard because you can't measure impact in lives, but you can measure decisions. You can't measure the effectiveness of outreach, but you can see how many people came. And so something your team will have to decide is, what's our purpose? How are we going to measure that purpose? Because if we don't know how to measure it, then we won't know how to evaluate and to see, did we really fulfill what we wanted to fulfill? And so this session, this webpage is going to help you to plan your vacation Bible school. One last thing, when it comes to measuring success, a lot of people measure success with the wrong standard, because sometimes even in church we have a tendency to measure success based on worldly standards. And for example, numbers, attendance. Attendance is a great measurable, but attendance cannot be what you live for. There are a lot of churches, and quite frankly, they seem to live for numbers. And I had one minister talk to me about their goal, how they measured every Sunday, was how many people they had in the seats. It measures things, but that can't be your ultimate measure. And I'm going to give you a story, I think, that'll put this in perspective. I was at a church a few years ago out in Missouri, and we were doing a revival. And on Sunday night before the revival started, an older gentleman, really just kind of a backbone person in the church, a deacon, he came up on stage, and I was setting up and we were getting ready to start. It was probably 10 or 15 minutes before service started. He came up and just out of the blue, he said, Colby, I want to tell you a story. He said, we've been doing a bus ministry here for 40 years. He said, but 20 years ago, we had to make a decision because times were hard, money was tight. And so we looked at all of our different ministries to decide what did we need to cut. And he said, when it came to our bus ministry, we realized we were bringing in children, we were bringing in youth, but it was expensive because we had maintenance on the buses, we had gas costs, then we fed the kids snacks, we had craft items, so there were a lot of costs involved. It brought in no money because the kids and the youth, they weren't giving, or what they did give was very minimal. And he said, and what really was breaking it for us was we didn't feel like it was successful. He said, we didn't feel like it was successful because we started it to reach the parents. We wanted to reach the parents through their kids. But he said, we weren't reaching parents. And so most of us felt like we had failed. And so we talked about it, we prayed about it, and finally, after some of us even fasted about it, we had our business meeting and we decided that we were going to continue doing the bus ministry. And he said, I'm so glad that we did. He said, when we made that decision, we thought that we were failing because we weren't reaching the parents. But what we didn't realize is even though we weren't reaching the parents, we were reaching our future. And then he turned around and he began to point out in the room all of these dozens of young adults in the room that night who came to their church as a part of that bus ministry, who were children or youth, and they grew up, they came to know Jesus, they got saved, they became Sunday school teachers and leaders in the church, and now their families attended the church here 20 years later. He said, I'm going to say it again, we didn't know it then, but even though we weren't reaching the parents, we were reaching our future. You see, the measurable they were using to evaluate their bus ministry was not a big enough picture. They were looking at the here and now. We're not reaching mom and dads. And there's a lot of children's ministry that have that frustration. But they've got to put it in context. You can't look at the here and now. Some of the kids that you're going to minister to are reaching Bible school. Someday they may reach mom and dad, but it may be 10 or 20 or 30 years down the road. Now, I speak from experience. I prayed for my grandfather for 20 years that he would give his life to Christ. My dad prayed for him for 40 years before he came to Christ. Adults, they're not necessarily reached overnight. And so when you go to measure something, we want to measure very physical things. But you've got to keep in mind the big picture. You can't remove God or how he moves or the long-term impact from how you're going to evaluate the success of an event. So listen to these sessions. Let us know if you have any questions.